Hi, this is Patrick Anderson with Plantain. In this low-code feature focus, I'm going to show you how you can use a combination of a server request action and the Execute JavaScript server-side action to take a very complex return from the HubSpot API and then parse it to pull out only the information you need to pass to subsequent actions. I'll create this in a workflow in Plantain, so it then becomes an action you can pull in anywhere in your application. I am borrowing the example I am using from my colleague Radu. He used this scenario in the Low Code Cafe episode 14 as part of the creation of the Extreme Marketing Campaigns application. Check it out if you want to see more cool things you can do with Plantain. In order to recreate this example, you will need a HubSpot account. In your HubSpot account, you will need to have created an API key, and you will need to have at least one contact list created. I've added a link to the Plantain app documentation for the Execute JavaScript server-side action in the description for this video below. There you will find some useful links to HubSpot documentation. Now, since I will be using my own HubSpot API key, I've stored it in a token so that I won't be showing it on the video as I'm recording, but this is also a pretty useful way to store API keys so that they can be reused in various places throughout the site, and that if the API key were to change, then you would only need to change it in one place. So in tokens here, I have a namespace called API keys, and you can see I have HubSpot there. I just want to show you this here. I'm not going to open it for editing so I don't expose my API key. But basically what I've done is created a constant token and pasted the API key in here. And then I'll be using that token when I'm creating the actions to access the HubSpot API. Next, I'm going to go to Workflows and create a new workflow. I'm going to call this workflow Get HubSpot Contact List. And then I'm going to add an action here, and what I want to search for is the server request. In my server request properties, in the URL field, I'm going to paste the URL that I've already pre-prepared, but I'm going to explain it a little bit here. So this is documented on the HubSpot documentation, but there's just a couple things I want to point out here. I need to access a specific list on HubSpot, but I'm putting that tokenized into this action. And I'm going to make this an input parameter for this workflow. And then, of course, as I was mentioning just earlier, I have the token for my HubSpot API key. I can remove this information right here, and I just need to specify that I am doing a get. And then finally, the only other thing I need to specify is an output token name, and that's where the response from the API is going to be stored for use in my next action. I'm going to call it contact.json. Now is when I'm going to add my Execute JavaScript server-side action. Let me go into my add action here, and I'm going to type in the same keyword I did before because that brings up this action as well, and I'll add that in here. I have some pre-prepared JavaScript that I am going to paste in there. I'm going to explain this a little bit more in just a moment, but for right now I just want to paste that in there, and we'll come back to this and look at the JavaScript a little bit. I need to specify an output token, and I'm going to call this contact list, and that's all I really need, and save. Now I'm going to add an end to the workflow, and then I need to specify my input and output parameters. So let's go back and just take a look at this again to remind you that I needed to have a list ID as an input. I'm going to copy that token, go to my input parameters, and put the list ID in there as an input parameter. And I'm going to make sure that is a number. And then for my output parameters, I want to use this token I'll use the same name for the parameter name, but the most important part is that I use the token for the output from the Execute JavaScript. Now I'm going to click Save. So now I've split my screen here so that I can show you, first of all, how complex the return from the HubSpot API for that list is. So I've run the API call here in Postman, And you can see that this is the information returned for just 3 contacts. All I want are the first name, last name, and email address out of this information. Let me open up the Execute JavaScript action again here. So you see that I have a simple function here that is mapping the properties from the returned JSON from the HubSpot API. So contact, which is the name of the function, .properties, .firstname, .value. So here's properties, first name, value for the first name for the user, and then likewise with last name, and then with email, we're mapping it to identity profiles, and then the identities, and then the email address. To get access to this sample script, as well as the complete code to import this action into your own application, follow the link in the video description below to Plantain App's documentation. So now returning to workflows, I've saved this and I just want to go ahead and run a test of it now. I'm going to click the test workflow, and I know that the list ID I want is 1, and I'm going to click run. And you can see that what I've returned down here is a significantly pared down JSON that just has the first name, last name, and email address for each of the people that are in my contact list with the ID of 1. Now that I have this workflow, this is now an action that can be accessed either from another workflow or on button actions throughout your application. So first I want to show you how you can access it from another workflow. So I'm going to create a new workflow. And what this workflow is going to do is send an email to those users that I got returned. So the first thing I'm going to add in is the workflow I just created. So I'm going to scroll down to Plantain App Workflows, and you can see here is the Get HubSpot Contact. So I have an action now called Execute Get HubSpot Contact List. I'm going to add that in. I'm going to make the list ID once again an input parameter so that this can be reused for various lists. And for the output, I'm going to use the same token name that I've been using, and I'm going to save that. Next, I'm going to add a load entities JSON. For JSON model, I'm going to pass in the return from the workflow I just created. I'm going to name the entity that's created contacts. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now I'm going to add another action to execute actions on that list that's returned. So I'm going to do something with each of the returned values from my HubSpot contact list. Execute actions on entity list is the action I'm going to choose here. So the entity I'm accessing is for the action I just added, and I decided to call the entity contacts. For the context behavior, I'm going to choose update all tokens in the original context. Now I'm going to add an action that's going to happen for each of the items returned. And I want to send an email. So for the tokens in here, I'm going to put here, that's the name of the entity that I just created with the previous action, and I'm going to be accessing the email address here, and put in a subject. And then in the body of the email, I'm going to access, once again, the entity and the first name and last name of each user from the HubSpot contact list. And that's all I need. I'm going to go ahead and save this action now. I'll go ahead and put an end to this workflow. And then I need to make sure I specify my input and output for this workflow. So once again, my input is just going to be that list ID, the list that I want to send emails to. And since I'm sending emails, I don't necessarily have to have any output for this workflow, but I'm just going to go ahead and put in an email address. Now all this will do is return the first email address from the list that's returned from the HubSpot API, but I'm just putting it in here so that when I test it, I can show that something got returned, and then I will show the actual emails that are produced by this. So now I've completed my workflow. I'm going to click Save, and I'll call it Send Email to HubSpot Contacts. Save that. So now I'm going to test this new workflow that's calling the workflow I created earlier. It's not prompting me to put in an input parameter, so I need to go back and edit that and make sure that I did everything correctly there, because I should be getting prompted for the list ID that I want to access. So we'll edit that, go back to input. Let's make sure we put this in here. I don't think I clicked add parameter before. That's what I did there, and I need to make sure that's a number. And so now I should be set. I'll go ahead and click save. And I'll test that workflow again. And now it's prompting me for the list ID. And the list I want is 1. And I'll click run. So you can see I got returned that first email address for the users that were returned. And that was just one single output parameter I had put there just to make sure that something was happening. But the emails were hopefully sent. And here you can see the emails for each of the users in my HubSpot list. So there's Homer, Bart, and Marge. The one last thing I want to show you is that I have these two workflows now created, and I can access either one of these that I want to anywhere in the application now. So if I go back to one of our pages here for an entity, and I customize the form, scroll down to a button, and to the actions list, and scroll down to Plantain App Workflows, you see that I have Execute Get HubSpot Contact List and the Execute Send Email to HubSpot Contacts. That wraps up this low-code feature focus, where you learned how to use the Execute JavaScript server-side action in a workflow to be accessed throughout your application. I hope you have found this information helpful. If there is another feature you'd like to see in a future video, please leave a comment below. For more great low-code content, make sure you subscribe to Plantain App by clicking the subscribe button below. Thank you.